Hello and welcome to the News9 Global Summit Show. We are counting down to our biggest and boldest event yet. On the 20th of February, Prime Minister Modi inaugurated the Chenab River Bridge. It's the world's highest railway bridge. It's taller than the Eiffel Tower. Now, last month, on the 12th of January, he inaugurated the Atal Setu, a 22-kilometer long bridge across Mumbai harbour. Now, one of India's biggest achievements over the last decade has been the explosive growth in infrastructure, the creation of resilient infrastructure like bridges, roads and airports that are powering India's economic growth. And all of this has got a focus like never before over the last decade. The government plans to spend over 96 lakh crore or over $1 trillion on infrastructure by the end of this decade to boost jobs and the economy. Krishna?
Right, that's right. And that spending that you're talking about over the next 6 years till the end of 2030 is more than double of what India as a country has spent on infrastructure over the course of the last 5 to 6 years since 2017. It's an important moment that we are in the middle of, and for two reasons. One is this big infrastructure push to all the physical infrastructure that we've been talking about, which is boards, ports and airports and bridges. And then, of course, the all-important digital public infrastructure as well. To talk about all of this and to understand all of this better, we have a couple of very special gentlemen joining us on the show. And one is, of course, editor of TV9's News9 Mediaverse, which is Mr. Rakesh Khar. Rakesh ji, thank you so much for taking time out. And of course, we have our good friend and colleague Kartik Malhotra as well joining us. Gentlemen, I want to begin with Rakesh ji. From Prime Minister's Gati Shakti to the great digital public infrastructure that India has developed, a model that the world should follow, from everything from UPI to FASTag. We are at the cusp of this infrastructure explosion, isn't it?
Absolutely, Krishna. We have to see it in two distinct modes. You rightly put it as two key buckets, but the kind of investment that this government has made in hard infrastructure, if I can call it, the digital infrastructure, I'll come in a minute.
Yes.
This is unprecedented. And the beauty about that is that you mentioned Chenab, Sandeep. The way the infrastructure has been built, the physical infrastructure has been built, has a very, very democratic approach to it. Yes. We do remember the railways as one big infrastructure spending over the decades post-independent India, but every spending by and large was linked to a political milestone. And not in this case the right milestone, it was the political address.
Right.
So if the railway minister happens to be from, say, a particular state, that state will have a massive skew. And what happened, once one started looking at the outcomes, there was essentially laying down of railway tracks, which were not followed up. So I think, as a country, we have phenomenally moved from that one big trajectory, and it's a paradigm shift indeed, that we have today a universal approach to growing both the urban and the urban and the city, infrastructure right down to the villages. So, repeatedly the Prime Minister has been talking about building 6.5 lakh villages with the same amount of intensity as we are building the Mumbai Metro or the Delhi. Of course, in terms of the spending, there has been a gap there, and there's lots to catch up. But phenomenal focus on building this hard infrastructure, which has massive economic spin-offs. I call them the economic multipliers.
Yes.
We keep talking about them, essentially benefiting large, private sector players. But the spin-off is massive, because ultimately, even if it's a big ticket company, it is employing hundreds and thousands and lakhs of people to undertake and execute that project in time.
Yes.
And timeline management of projects with this particular government has been extremely rewarding. So in that sense, that multiplier effect goes down to the last mile. That is also one of the reasons there is a new defined economic labharthi here. One is the bottom of the pyramid labharthi. In this case, I call it the aspiring low middle class labharthi who is benefiting from this massive boost infrastructure. Of course, there are limits in to the investment that government can make in infrastructure. And I have repeatedly been arguing along with Kartik that the private sector has to kick in to at least match this, if not do it better. Ideally, they should do it better than that.
Mr. Khar, I want to ask you, since you have studied India's economic liberalization so closely for 33 years, this is the 33rd year since liberalization, how China did it was they built the infrastructure first and then simultaneously liberalized the economy. In our case, we are talking about roads, bridges, railway lines, airports 3 decades after they should have been done. Why? What explains this? Was this that political thing that you were talking of, that fragmented
No,
approach?
I would say that reform still continues to be one of the key landmarks in India's economic journey, and I would say even the political journey. Unfortunately, the politician who did it didn't get his credit. That is the former Prime Minister Narasimha Rao.
He finally did.
He finally
did this year with the Bharat Ratna.
Posthumous credit is no credit to my mind, but yes, in symbolism it did.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that India is not one homogeneous market.
Right.
It's not one homogeneous entity.
Yes.
Even today, we'll have to admit there are patches of huge growth.
Yes.
There are equally large swaths of land which are not yet developed.
Right.
So it's not going to be an overnight miracle that will change it.
Right.
And the model that we didn't follow rightly from China, I would say today, looking back, I mean, I was covering automobiles that time,
Yes.
working for the Pink Daily. The Chinese, when they opened a foreign direct investment, say for instance in auto, they first asked for a mandated investment in the auto components.
Right. Absolutely.
India brought in all the foreign players,
Yes.
Devus, we remember, they came in
the
and the
90s.
Cielo, the famous Cielo.
Yes.
And the result is that since we didn't follow that model, we have about 10 top global manufacturers exiting India.
Right.
So in the automobile sector, it isn't a great story to say because most of the manufacturers didn't find it, worthwhile to stay in
Right.
because, had we built a bottoms-up economy,
Right.
infrastructure in terms of the manufacturing base,
Yes.
probably the results would have been better in automobiles. Not that Indian automobile is not doing well,
Right.
but probably many more players versus 3 or 4 or 5 big players would have made a dramatic change in the way we imagine today our automobile landscape.
Right.
Okay, that's as far as the story, as far as physical infrastructure is concerned, Sandeep. And,
Right.
and that's the reason why when we began this show,
Yeah.
I also put in that all-important digital public infrastructure. Like you're
absolutely.
pointing out, maybe we missed the bus, unlike China,
Yeah.
which was developing its economy and infrastructure simultaneously.
Right.
But Kartik, when it comes to digital public infrastructure, India has certainly not missed the bus. India has in fact taken the lead. There is nothing like the UPI
Yes.
anywhere else
in the world.
and the entire India stack story per se, Kartik, isn't
No,
it?
you're right. I think, and there's something that we keep discussing, and there are enough and more newspaper headlines also that talk about the success of India's stack, that talk about the success of DPI as a concept and the export potential of DPI. Now, I think unfortunately the narrative gets a little confused because when we get all excited about the fact that you can buy Eiffel Tower tickets using the UPI, unfortunately in France, in Paris, in Eiffel Tower, that ticket buying counter, it is still restricted only to Indians who have their UPI linked back to their accounts, who are traveling perhaps for tourism, who can scan and buy tickets. So technically, India has still not really exported that India stack architecture. And I think that is what is going to bring in the dollars. So while we are celebrating UPI, it's obviously a phenomenal model, and I think there is nothing like this anywhere in the world. But let's not forget, you also have, when you travel to London or if you travel to the US, you also have the Google Pay and the Apple Pay integrated on your smartwatch, where you don't even need to physically take out a phone, scan a QR code and walk out. NFC and other technologies permit you to just tap and go. So, we should pride ourselves with the great work that we have done from a cash denominated economy over the last 7-8 years, transforming ourselves into a digital payments economy. But let's not fool ourselves in believing that we are the only ones who are doing it.
Okay.
There are enough and more examples outside of India as well. More so in the developed stack, but even if you look at some African countries, you have the M-Pesa. M-Pesa has been as revolutionary for North Africa as the UPI has been for India. But there is obviously merit in exploring the possibility of exporting that architecture, because we are not linked only to a bank account using UPI. Our DPI covers a plethora of other tools as well. For example, unique identification, India's Aadhaar, or the unified identification of every citizen is something which is the bedrock of DPI. Add on that a unique mobile number linked to an Aadhaar card. That unique mobile number linked to X number of bank accounts owned by the same person who has the same Aadhaar, who has the same mobile number. So overall, this integration of DPI has been something that India has done better than anybody else. And when you talk about exporting the DPI story outside India, it's not likely to be limited to UPI alone. It has to be the entire India stack, and that is likely to draw in the dollar revenue.
If I can add to what Kartik said, we have to understand this DPI export in a very nuanced manner. It is more from the geopolitical perspective rather than the geoeconomic perspective. I'll explain how. The universe of services that UPI or the DPI offers is vastly different from any other country. For an example, our foreign affairs minister, he went with his son, he gave this example in one of his speeches. to a restaurant in US, and he was asked to produce the COVID certificate. His son produced a long physical document. This gentleman produced his phone, and it was scanned. That certificate was there. So, Kartik, to my mind, please correct me. The export is not about dollars. The export is about soft power, making a global impression.
Right.
And this India stack is going to travel first to emerging economies, which are doing much less better than India in terms of their per capita income. So I do see this particular infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, moving to countries where we are going to build this service as India's export without any commercial transaction to it.
But Rakesh, I think while I agree with you, there is
so there is a
potential
back end,
of soft
Kartik.
power,
No, there is
but
a
soft power alone in the
yeah.
DPI story is unlikely to cut it, because at the end of the day, you want your own IT companies, you want the TCSs of the world and the Infosys and the HCLs of the world to actually implement this DPI internationally.
I was coming to that, Kartik. When you do it internationally, the bulk of the work today in the entire DPI infrastructure is being done by the government.
Correct. And
It has
NPCI, when you talk about
which
the
is again
financial,
government.
which is again government.
It is funded by the government. I do envision a very large ecosystem around this digital infrastructure, which has to come to the private sector, which hasn't yet happened.
It hasn't happened.
It is
It's a
essentially because
platform.
there is
It
a limit
provides a
again
platform for a variety of
limit to the
services.
way India government is going to subsidize all these services. Kartik has been making that point.
Right.
That's where the private sector, once we get bulk bookings, even if we are not paid there, as an entity, it's not an export in the export traditional sense, but those who are building that infrastructure will enable and enrich the financial ecosystem.
And while
On
we're
that
on
note,
this, I think, there's also ONDC. And when we talk about India's stack, I think that is another very critical element that we need to consider in our discussions. And again, ONDC, highly subsidized by the government. In fact, it is the government's pet project pretty much, with private players partaking in making it happen. But broadly, the ONDC story also continues to be a highly subsidized for the Indian economy delivery story, right?
Yes.
At the end of the day, you've got to make sure that these government subsidized products find an economic value of their own.
In fact,
there
on
is a
that
social
note,
value.
Kartik, I want to break for a quick interview with we did with IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav. Just let's take a look at what he has to say about India's 5G and 6G dreams. Let's watch.
Basically, the industry has come out of its troubled times, of its difficult times. The way Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has reformed the industry, the first major reform happened last September. Then there were 3 or 4 other major reforms which happened over last few months. For example, today a tower permission takes just few minutes, which used to take sometimes months. There were 400 odd crore paper applications lying which had to be audited, all kind of stuff was there. That's all gone. So many different things which PM Saab has reformed. It's the auction result is basically a reflection of those reforms. There are World Bank research reports that as telecom services are made available to people, the GDP multiplier is almost 1.5. So whatever investment goes in telecom services, they have a huge impact on the overall delivery of services. Take, for example, if there is a small handicraft maker somewhere in rural India, let's say somewhere in remote parts of Odisha, with good telecom services, that person would be able to showcase her products to a buyer in Europe, to a buyer in US. So those kind of things start happening. So competition is going to increase now. Question of duopoly doesn't arise because 1, reforms have happened. 2, BSNL has been given a very substantial revival package of 1,64,000 crore. 1,64,000 crore. A very properly laid out way forward for its growth. So BSNL will emerge as a big market stabilizer. So I think it's going to be future is going to see more players.
Infra, investment and IT, India's 3I imperative. In fact, we have a keynote interview, Kartik, with the minister at the Global Summit, and you're going to be doing that. What are you going to be asking him?
Yeah, thankfully I'm not alone, and I'll have Rakesh also with me doing that interview. But
It's the two of you. Yeah.
so, I think it's a very interesting subject because like Krishna mentioned, right at the start of this discussion, that we can't look at infrastructure in isolation because India's overall investments, and in fact the three I's are infrastructure, investment and IT.
Right.
In fact, there is a confluence of all three which are making up the India story. And I think it's important to look at it in that context, and especially with Mr. Vaishnav sitting there. My focus is largely going to be to understand, because IT now being disrupted as we know it, as we live and breathe with artificial intelligence, I think that is going to be the next big disruptor when we talk about India's IT success and replicating that in the era of artificial intelligence. But very closely linked to that, in fact, pretty much giving it the foundation, is also going to be the manufacturing to enable smarter, cheaper, more efficient, affordable AI solutions, which will come through GPUs. Now, GPUs, as we know, the hegemony is right now controlled by two countries alone, one being US with NVIDIA and the other being China with Huawei.
Right.
There isn't any other GPU maker worth his or her salt which can power this AI revolution. And go one level deeper than that, you've got the entire semiconductor fab manufacturing story, and which is where IT gets directly linked with investment. And that investment is going to obviously happen only, and there is enough allocation. PLI, for example, is a 1.97 lakh crore rupee corpus outlay which has been earmarked, and in addition to that, there is a separate 76,000 crore rupee outlay for enabling semiconductors. So there's a massive incentive which the government is already putting to attract these manufacturers of semiconductors. And that again gets linked back to infrastructure, because eventually what they're putting up by way of plants and factories is infrastructure. So this trinity of 3I gets, converged in one man, who is Ashwini Vaishnav, and I think it's going to be exciting to get his vision on how India's AI story is going to play out in the context of these three I's.
The kind of catching up that we have to do, Krishna, it's unbelievable. When demonetization happened in 2016, the newspapers had like a front page thing on saying that how to use, UPI, how to use a mobile phone, payments. The next page of the newspaper had a thing on how to use toilets. That's the kind of thing that you're talking of, catching up. You're building toilets and you're talking about
a watershed moment in history.
That's the kind of catching up that you have to do.
I have to ask you this, now that we're talking, he's rightly pointed out, we have a lot of catching up to do. We are, backed by the right kind of investments and the right kind of focus on investments to catching up to do. And in that sense, we have the right person in the form of Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav, who's at the helm of affairs to do this, to accomplish this, isn't it, Rakesh?
I was on a show with Sandeep the other day, and I identified 4 I's: infrastructure, investment, inclusion and indigenization. Read Make in India. I wanted to add a B there. What Mr. Modi has done, he has empowered bureaucracy like never before. Because there's been a history of mistrust between various governments and the bureaucracy. It's a parallel power center, if I can dare say so. What Mr. Modi has done, he has mainstreamed bureaucracy in the political arena. So when you bring them in as the drivers of change, not just implementing, but also imagining a policy under overall leadership of Mr. Modi. So if you see his cabinet, all the core economic ministries are manned by
former bureaucrats,
former babus. And in this case, Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav mans 3 of them. So that's why it's extremely important, and he's the right qualification, and I dare say the right experience to do that. He comes from the best of the private sector. He's, so to say, dirtied his hand being a bureaucrat, and then, his management experience comes into play. I wish India needs, and pray that we need more and more of such, professionals coming into politics, and then finally being vested with the Lok Sabha route rather than the Rajya Sabha route, because that will, further empower this bureaucracy, the B element. So in that sense, he's the best guy for the bed that we have.
He is. In fact,
coming to the core of it, to my mind, the big challenge is that we have taken so much pride in our IT story and continue to do that. But the IT story globally has moved way forward, and there are new challenges. We have to reimagine the Indian IT story. And if we want to use that IT success story so far as the template to reimagine our AI or our semiconductor, then we are grossly mistaken. So I think first and foremost, when we talk about building our export basket and using services as the key area, we have to relook at our IT, as the key driver. the entry of GCCs, moving away from the comfort zone of lower end of the spectrum but high volumes game for the IT sector, which gave us decades of guaranteed growth, is no longer the solution, neither in terms of sustaining our current position nor taking us forward to the next level. So, Mr. Vaishnav has, as I said, the right credentials to drive this trinity. At the same time, I think it needs a little more, pushing of the global investing community. If there are not many countries, Kartik is right,
Yes.
who have given this kind of a, I would call it the red carpet welcome. One is intent. Execution is the case here. You actually got the big money in your hand.
Yes.
I would have been happier imagining many more big companies in these two spaces coming to India. On AI front also, we have the ethical lead to my mind, but that is not going to be good enough. We need really to dirty our hands on the table, on the ground, to actually get the best of the AI play that's happening all over the world.
On that note, Mr. Khar, let's watch that documentary that Kartik put out on our AI story. Let's watch.
Not careful with creating artificial general intelligence, we could have potentially a catastrophic outcome.
AI is going to be such a large part of our future and is so complicated and moving so fast.
Going to be an existential threat to their work.
This AI cannot go in wrong hands.
I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong.
President Trump is a total and complete dipshit, like Jordan Peele.
As an actor, I pretend for a living.
As if pretending that climate change wasn't real.
Wow, Rahul Baba. Arey Modi ji, dekhiye to sahi.
In the future, are you intending to conduct a rebellion or to rebel against your boss, your creator?
I think AI will have to be regulated. The quicker, the better.
So while we're talking about AI, there's also that focus that we need to give our growth engines like Mumbai and Bengaluru. The background that you're looking at here is the Atal Setu, the Trans-Harbour link. And that actually talks about the kind of money that the government is pushing into Mumbai for the first time. And that's why you call it Maximizing Mumbai. So let's watch that story, Maximizing Mumbai by Kiran Tare.
The longest sea bridge in India is now open, and the Mumbai Trans-Harbour Link is 4 times bigger than the Bandra-Worli Sea Link. It will help Mumbai's notoriously long commutes become shorter. It will help slash the 3-hour journey from Shivdi to Alibag by 165 minutes. You can reach the mainland in just 15 minutes. And this is just the beginning of Mumbai's makeover. A toll-free coastal road connecting Marine Drive to the Bandra-Worli Sea Link is next in line.
I have a Maximizing Mumbai story myself about this bridge. About 3 decades ago, nearly 3 decades ago, Nitin Gadkari was the PWD minister, and he was building bridges. We used to call him the Pulkari minister. Bridges and the first expressway, Mumbai-Pune expressway.
Yeah.
And he spoke about this project that's 3-decade-old report that had been submitted in the 60s. Trans-Harbour Link, and he says that 7 saal to lagenge, he says, and from his face I could make out that he meant 7 saal, it's like beyond the term of my government. And his government didn't come back to power. In 1999, the BJP Sena didn't come back. This project was begun 15 years later, after they came back to power, after the 3 governments, successive governments were, held power in Maharashtra. And then finally you had the BJP Sena coming in, and that's how this project took off. So, Mr. Khar, this thing of political stability, we've been talking about it. This uninterrupted political continuity that's really important for infrastructure. How important do you see this in the current context?
It's extremely important to sustain the momentum.
Right.
You know, as one of the sessions that we have is sustaining the movement and the
Yes.
momentum at What India Thinks Today Global Summit. One of the good things about this government has been that, you know, they have been extremely focused on timelines.
Yes.
By and large, they have met timelines of various heavy-duty infrastructure projects. And they've also, so to say, caught up on some earlier projects, you know, like some bridge in the Northeast. Northeast
Yes.
was never given the right attention,
Right.
which was lying there for 15 years.
Yes.
But obviously, there's so much to catch up. Mumbai, you said, you know,
Yes.
we did that story,
Yeah.
maximizing Mumbai. When you do a Mumbai-Delhi comparison, Sandeep, what happens is that Delhi, because of the Commonwealth Games, got a massive, unprecedented one-time push.
Right.
Mumbai is still waiting for that big-ticket push.
Yes.
You know, there is a trigger. There are occasional spikes like this one. You know, we keep talking about maximizing Mumbai, but it won't happen. I have repeatedly said that for maximizing Mumbai, we
Yes.
need maximum investments.
Maximum.
So in terms of the overall outlay, and if you're a Mumbaiker, you know, you will say I'm contributing X amount to the GDP, which is much more than any other state. So then, you know, I need far greater share
Right.
of development, which has not yet happened. I mean, you come monsoon and you see what happens to Mumbai.
Yes.
You know, it's a pothole story which runs all
Abysmal,
through.
yeah.
So abysmal. The other big challenge to my mind is that, you know, whenever you build heavy-duty infrastructure, I keep giving this example because I'm extremely sad about it. I live it every day. The D&D flyover
Yes.
was built with such aplomb, and we made such heavy investments. It was, you know, a Noida toll bridge company, but because of right or wrong reasons, the judiciary, you know, came in and then said that we should stop paying the, you know, the toll and toll tax, and the result is there for everyone to see. I hope there is a learning there. I'm told that just to keep it running, which is the lifeline between South Delhi and East Delhi,
Yes.
we'll need another 100 crores. Who is
Right.
going to foot that bill? So if you are able to build infrastructure in the right time and the right framework,
Yes.
the right quality, it's equally important to sustain that framework for another, you know, 30, 40, 50 years.
Right, absolutely. And Ms. Khar, you know, while you were speaking about projects in the Northeast, our reporter Nivriti Mohan and video journalist Manish just traveled to Arunachal Pradesh recently, where they got an exclusive glimpse of the Sela Tunnel. Now, this is a strategic tunnel connecting Guwahati to Tawang, and China claims all of Arunachal Pradesh as its territory. So, tunnels like Sela are extremely important to guarding our frontier. Let's watch Nivriti Mohan's report.
So News9 Mediaverse is the first media house to be inside the Sela tunnel after its completion, and the tunnel is complete now, and it looks beautiful. You can see it is a very beautiful tunnel, and we have with us Colonel Ravikant Tiwari, who is the project director for this entire project. How costly is the project, sir?
It is a 825 crores project. And it's a twin tunnel project with the two approach roads and one link road. So the road length is approximately 9 kilometers. Where is standing right now, the tunnel 2, it is 1595 meters, and the tunnel 1 is 1005 meters. So effectively 2.6 kilometers tunnel with a parallel escape tunnel towards my right, which is running parallelly to this tunnel.
So this escape tunnel is for the safety of the workers, the passengers.
Yeah, as per the international standards, we have to provide a escape tunnel in any tunnel which is more than 1500 meters. So we have provided one over here. It has got 5 cross passages at a spacing of 250 meters, and this connects to the escape tunnel, which is 4 meter high, and it has got a carriageway of 4 meters.
Right. So how will it reduce the distance? Earlier you used to take Sela Pass to reach Tawang. Now how much of distance will be reduced?
Distance will be reduced by around 8 kilometers, but the timing will be reduced around 45 minutes in clear weather, and in winters it goes up to 3 to 4 hours because of the icing and because it's a single lane road up to Sela Pass from the Baisakhi side. So overall I would say 1 hour minimum for everyone.
Is it going to be a game changer strategically and for civilians as well?
Yeah, 100%. Anything which reduces time to the commuters is a game changer, because in terms of, if you see the socio-economic growth of the state, so the tourism influx will be more. For the commuters who move from Tezpur side to Tawang side to Tezpur side, they'll be traveling faster. So yes, it is going to be a game changer.
Earlier, it used to happen that for 4 to 5 months or 3 to 4 months, the Sela Pass, at the Sela Pass, there was a great difficulty for the movement of troops.
Rather, as we speak right now, around 3 days back, the movement was 1 day from the Tawang side, 1 day from the Tezpur side, because the traffic used to get stuck up for 12 hours sometimes. So just because last 3 days have been clear weather, so we could clear it off, and now the traffic is flying from both the sides. So there is a great difficulty in winters for 2-3 months.
So now, instead of 1 hour, you'll take just 10 minutes through this tunnel to reach
20 minutes. Side. 20 minutes. So I say that 1 hour, 10 minutes it is through the tunnel to reach the start and end point of this tunnel, and 20-25 minutes through this tunnel. So effectively 45 minutes are saving for the light vehicles, so 1 hour for the heavy vehicles.
Is it going to deter China?
I'd not comment on that. But yes, this whole thing is going to be, a game changer and very, very fruitful for the people residing in this area towards the Tawang side and towards the Dirang side.
You were telling me that if you consider the aerial distance, it should be around 30 to 40 kilometers from the LAC?
Yeah, from the border area, yeah.
Strategically, this tunnel is going to be very important because it connects you to Tawang, which is strategically very, very important area for Indian side, for India. And this tunnel will make our forces reach faster towards Tawang, towards the LAC. Nivriti Mohan, News9.
For the longest time, Kartik, we never built infrastructure on the borders with China, especially because we were afraid that the Chinese would use that infrastructure to invade us.
I mean, I'm sure, Sandeep, that would have been one of the reasons given.
Right.
India, to my mind, did not have enough money to build infrastructure.
That's right. So, number two.
At some level, we've got to look at the fact that today India is also getting a lot more revenue than it used to, traditionally, by way of GST collections, by way of the number of people paying income taxes, though many of them are still filing zero tax returns. But the fact that the tax base has widened, there is obviously FDI coming in, there is FII coming in. Overall, the investment climate in India is better. You're talking about, Sela Pass, and in fact, I happened to visit Sela Pass about a decade ago or so.
Yeah.
And you're right, those roads continued to be immotorable, insurmountable, and we had to get skid chains fitted on that Mahindra Xylo, the only vehicle which was capable then of going over those snow-laden passes.
Yes.
And lo and behold, we got stuck. And we had to walk about, 100 meters or so in snow to reach a gypsy waiting on the other side of the pass and then continue our journey. So building infrastructure in those, climatic conditions at those peaks without the right investment in technology, in machinery is obviously expensive and not something that India could very easily afford, back in the day. Right. But even right now, I think the government's leitmotif behind these investments in infrastructure also happen to be the fact that you don't really have too much private sector capital investment still coming in. Now, you've got to keep the GDP number ticking, and that is pretty much, your calling card right now for the whole world. I mean, India, the bright spot, the fastest growing major economy, we've seen all these headlines.
Yes.
That is something which is pretty much happening on the base of government's own investments in infrastructure. Is that the only reason? Obviously not. You want the GDP numbers to grow, but then what Rakesh was mentioning earlier, the multiplier effect of infrastructure.
Yes.
So cheaper, freer, faster movement of people as well as goods. I think the entire churn which is happening in supply chain and how that is being, look at the number of unicorns which are there in supply chain, right? So I think that is something which is catapulting India's growth right now to a large extent. And then of course the consumption story, as we know, the urban consumption story is great, of course.
The only thing we haven't discussed when it comes to all that multiplier effect is that once upon a time it was the railway stations which created the multiplier effect. Today it's all about the airports, from Ayodhya to every single city to Trichy, where the government just recently opened an airport.
And Noida, I mean, likely to open end of this year.
Absolutely, Jewar.
It's not just, I mean, you mentioned airports which are happening every day now. I mean, we're adding airports at a fascinating speed. Metro economy, you go to a metro station, just go outside of the metro station. What I call the metro economy, it's phenomenal. I mean, it may be informal, it may be a little irritating, it can cause a traffic jam, but then the multiplier effect is for everyone to see. On the infrastructure piece, I think one point that, Sandeep, you were making, which needs to be repeated and so to say stressed, this government, so to say, depoliticized, locating development from a political prism only. Northeast is of strategic importance.
Absolutely.
That has led as a collateral to BJP gaining an entry into Northeast in terms of the electoral gains. But I think the bigger intent and the result for the country as a whole is that we have strengthened our pillars in Northeast. Now that template is being followed by other states as well,
Right.
both BJP and non-BJP. That's the good part of it. Because any good economic policy, I keep saying, post-liberalization, the biggest, so to say, positive of that is that there is complete consensus on economic reforms in this country today.
Absolutely, and I think
the
that's one of the biggest
road taken
takeaways
could be
of
different, but
liberalization.
there is
Yes.
consensus, and
There
that
is
is being
consensus
seen.
across the
That's
board.
being seen across states who are
Right.
vying for greater attention of both investors, spending, consumption.
I think that's the big, win of the India story. That the fact that every political party is aligned when it comes to economic liberalization. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for a very exciting discussion on maximizing India's infra push. We're going to continue this discussion at the Global Summit,
Right.
where Mr. Khar and Kartik are going to be speaking to Minister Ashwini Vaishnav. Meanwhile, season 2 of Dialogue with Barun Das has just been uploaded on the News9 Plus app. We leave you with a glimpse of this cerebral conversation with Dr. Deepak Chopra, where Deepak Chopra and Barun Das exchange ideas and theories that traverse a wide range of mind, body, and soul. Download and watch the entire series. Thanks for watching.
You put a rabbit in a vacuum, it dies. You put a plant in a vacuum, it dies. You put them together, they thrive. So ageless body is Brahmand and timeless mind is Brahman. Right now, the world is the victim of the hypnosis of social conditioning, where we have confused ourselves with our selfies.
When the real outcome matches the expectations that we have, then we are joyful. Is there a simple formula of joy and happiness that you would conform to?
Happiness is always for a reason. There is a formula for happiness. Here it is. H is equal to S plus C plus V.
But if you make things simple, do you think people have a natural inclination not to take it seriously?
Simple is elegant. Simplicity is stupid.
Have you ever written in your prescription that how often sex is important in a love relationship?
In my opinion or my experience, and I don't need to defend it, it's called power mongering, influence peddling, cronyism, and corruption.